Well, welcome everyone. Quick question for you. How well do you exercise restraint? It's a fair question, right? Remaining cool and collected under the pressure of everyday work and stress and home life. Now that's difficult, but now imagine this. Imagine feeling the weight of keeping cool when someone is out to sabotage or attack or derail you. I'll tell you what, that is a whole nother ball game. Perhaps in recent history, there isn't been a time where the message of restrain yourself has been more relevant, especially given the added weight that we all feel of global pandemics, that we're in economic turmoil, food shortages, supply shortages, wars, political and racial challenges. All of these things make the concept of restraining yourselves all the more challenging. Restrain yourself, the command, becomes more than just an effective battle cry in a war waged against the ego, but it's a battle cry for civility and humanity to exist with peace and kindness in general. And so welcome to the Level Up Your Legacy podcast and live stream. I'm Paul McCosco. I'm a coach and trainer, and I'm here today with Bill Cox, and we're excited to talk about the concept of self-restraint. It's the focus of chapter 6 in Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy, and I'm glad that you tuned in and joined us today, whether you're watching us live right now or whether you're going to be tuning in sometime in the future. We're excited that you've tuned in to our discussion, and we'd love for you to get involved in today's discussion. So feel free to comment on this video, ask us a question, maybe let us know something that you're thinking about in the comments. We'd love to interact with you in real time. So as I said earlier, today's chapter in Ego is the Enemy is called Restrain Yourself. And I like this chapter title because it kind of sounds like a command that maybe I'd give my kids, right? My kids always remind me, anytime I ask them to do anything, they say, well, why? Well, why is this important? And I'll tell you what, we're going to talk about why restrain yourself is important in just a second. But first, before we get to the why, let's talk about the what and the how of restraining yourself. We'll start with the what. So what is restraining yourself? Ryan Holiday starts this chapter by telling the story of Jackie Robinson. Now, maybe you recognize that name. He was the first Black baseball player, and he was an icon in American history, not in terms just of his baseball skills, but that he was the one who paved the way for people of color to integrate into America's pastime. Prior to that, he had been a brawler, right? He had regularly found himself in trouble standing up for people of color. He was arrested multiple times. He spent the night in jail prior to going to college. He then went on to join the military, where his career was ended when a bus driver asked him to step into the back of the bus, and he wasn't having it. He wasn't one to be pushed around prior to baseball, but then something shifted in him. Something changed. He was recruited by Branch Rickey, who is the manager and owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, to become the first Black baseball player. And when Rickey approached him, he said, I'm looking for someone specific, for a baseball player with guts, but maybe not the kind of guts you're thinking of, guts not to fight back. Robinson agreed to be his guy, and from that moment on, they had this unwritten pact that he would never give in to explosive anger, even if he was provoked. So let's stop right here for a second, Bill, and talk about this. History would show that Jackie Robinson was not only booed, provoked, attacked, cheated out of plays and calls. He had his life threatened. He was hit by something like 72 pitches. His Achilles heel, they said, was almost torn off by players who would jam their spikes into his legs. And yet he kept cool and under control. Now, I'm not sure that I could endure that under those circumstances, but my first question is, how in the world do you exercise restraint and self-control when you're provoked like that? What do you think?
Well, I don't know. There's no way I can even begin to relate to that story and the very real injustices that he faced. I definitely can relate to how difficult it is to not react, to not just give full vent to my impulses. When I thought about this, I first thought, I have no idea what it would be like to experience or go through what he went through. Not even gonna pretend.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. But when I thought about like, okay, all of us have those situations where we feel some level of injustice. We're not treated fairly. I'm not treated with respect. Somebody says something that, was unthoughtful, or just kind of one of the things that Ryan talked about in the chapter. If you're an organization where, you're an up and comer, and there are people who are entrenched, and they maybe feel threatened by you. There may be people in the organization, they themselves, that have a leadership position over you, and they're insecure leaders, and they feel threatened by you, and so at every turn they're going to try to prevent your success, prevent you from moving forward in the organization, and to some of the things that would be important for you, some of the things that you might legitimately deserve just by virtue of your production, your skills, that you think that would legitimately be yours. How do you deal with those things? We all have those situations. And, the first thing that came to my mind really was, how do you deal with those situations on a practical level? I think the key is create some space between my emotions and my reaction. And this really kind of goes back to some basic practical coaching skills that we talk about a lot related to this whole issue and topic of emotional intelligence, right? Like, one of the things that we learn from the whole EQ world, and this idea of the fact that we are emotional beings, is just that our brain is wired such that when we experience things in life, something like this, somebody says something or does something to us where we feel disrespected, before it ever gets to our rational brain, those stimuli go through our emotional brain first. And
And you want to
so,
react. You want to jump on it.
exactly, that's what the whole, many people talk about in the whole brain science world of the amygdala hijack, that the emotional center of my brain is, it wants to, at a subconscious level, protect me from any kind of threat, right? And so when somebody does something that's disrespectful or says something that's hurtful, we move into that reactive mode, that protective mode, that fight or flight mode. It's really driven by more primitive centers in our brain. And I think one of the principles in emotional intelligence, when you think about the first two components of emotional intelligence, which are self-awareness and then self-management. I got to start with me. Emotional intelligence is all about ultimately having successful and healthy relationships with other people, because life is all about our ability to build and cultivate effective relationships. But in order to do that, I've got to manage me. And the first piece of that self-awareness. So, like, back to that principle of creating space, I've got to be more aware of what's going on inside of me, like taking a step back and almost stepping outside of myself and looking down on myself and saying, okay, you're feeling really angry right now.
Yeah.
um, what's going on here? What is this? What are you tempted to do right now? What do you want to do? And then, will that action result in ultimately what you ultimately want for yourself? What do you really want out of this? Do you want your pound of flesh? Do you want revenge? What do you ultimately want? And when you can kind of stop, slow down, ask yourself some questions, be aware of like just what's going on inside of me, what's driving that, then you can pull your rational brain online, the neocortex, and let your rational brain talk to your emotional brain. Really, when we get into those reactive modes, the fight or flight, that connection between our rational brain, where we literally talk ourselves off the ledge, gets severed. And then we're just reacting out of emotion. And that usually has a really, really bad ending, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of even goes back to that parenting concept of we want to respond, not react.
Yeah.
And maybe that space allows you chance to figure out number one, how you want to respond, and two, form an action plan so you can actually respond that way instead of like the reptilian brain kicking, like you're saying, and just start reacting viscerally of how you
Yeah.
truly feel in the moment. The moment we can get pretty ugly. I know I can. It's
Yeah,
true.
and I think, depending on your personality, um, I'm an I style, and I've talked about this already. Like these chapters really hit me hard because personally, I find this to be very challenging. I tend to be more emotional as a human being. Some people are wired such that by virtue of their personality, they're not as expressive outwardly in their emotions when they get triggered. They're
Which
able
would be me.
to.
That I think you're describing me fairly. Like I'm an
Yeah,
S style, and I don't respond outwardly like that. Yeah, I'd better
yeah, so you're
internalize
able
it.
to control yourself in those situations. It doesn't necessarily mean, and I think you are more mature than me. It doesn't mean that a person is more mature because they can control themselves. Some of it just has to do with their personality. So
Mhm.
that when somebody says something like that, they're kind of their your response might be to kind of go silent, to
Mhm.
withdraw.
Shut down, withdraw. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it seems like you're more self-control, and you are. I think that's one of the benefits of your style is that you tend not to, like me, say stupid things and then regret them and give full vent to your emotions. So back to this creating space thing, of like one of the techniques, the practical techniques they recommend with emotional intelligence is literally stopping to breathe.
Hmm.
Because when we start going down this path of the amygdala hijack and want to react, literally the oxygen moves away from our brain to the extremities, hence fight or flight. I'm going to run or I'm going to put up my dukes.
Hmm.
And breathing, literally stopping, is taking a series of breaths. So like it might be, instead of saying something stupid, I'm going to go to the water fountain and get a drink, you know, and it's going to force me to take several steps to the water fountain and breathe while I'm on the way and take a sip of water. You might have a water bottle on your table. And we talk about in coaching the simple way, if you're the kind of person like me who tends to just say things reactively, that you regret. One of the simple ways to do that is to figure out in advance, if something like this happens, instead of what am I going to do every
Do that
time.
ahead of time, so that way you're
Yeah,
not making that
exactly.
decision in the
Implementation
moment.
intentions, right? So no, having a plan of attack before these things occur sets you up for, or create the likelihood, a much greater likelihood that you're going to be successful in not doing the same stupid things, but replacing it with a much healthier behavior. So knowing in advance, one of the techniques I teach is every time somebody says something stupid and disrespectful, instead of reacting and just saying the first thing on my mind, I will. And then that third step, this is the new behavior, right?
Hmm.
Every time that's the trigger. Instead of, that's the ingrained behavior, I will. What's the new behavior? Well, I will stop, pick the water bottle up off my table, and take a sip and count to 10. Okay, so I can do that, right? It's an action that I don't typically do, that I will do to do what? Allow me to create space, take a couple deep breaths, reoxygenate my brain, and get my neocortex back online. So I'm not just thinking out of my emotions or acting out of my emotions, but now I'm thinking more reasonably, more rationally, and thinking about, hey, getting back to the Jackie Robinson illustration, he had this greater vision that he was going back to. This isn't just about me in the moment right now. There's something much bigger at stake. His legacy, what he really wanted to create through his life or his experience in sports, he wanted to pave the way for a whole generation of Black athletes. So his why was very big, and he was able to keep that in mind. And it was that vision, it was that greater purpose for his life that enabled him to exercise self-control.
So I hear you saying three things right now. I hear you saying, first, easy, just take a step back and take a deep breath, right? Reoxygenate your brain, allow some space in between, the thing that's driving you crazy and your potential reaction toward it, right? And then the second thing would be, I'm trying to think of how you said it. You said it so well. Develop a plan ahead of time in
Yeah,
order to figure out how you want to react, because in the moment, you are just you don't have the thinking space, the RAM
absolutely.
available for that. And the third
Absolutely.
thing is to keep the bigger picture in mind. I love that because, it even goes back to like a classic coaching question, how do I want to show up in the moment? If you've developed this idea of how you want your life to go, how you want to show up in every moment, you can be working toward that, and for Jackie, his why was so compelling that he didn't have time for even the large but petty offenses that were happening against him.
Yeah.
I don't mean to minimize that, but in comparison to how big his why was, those were
Oh
just
yeah.
little slights.
And I mean, and
Yeah.
you look at his life and you look at the impact that he had because he was able to control himself. And that's a concept that isn't real popular in today's world. Today's culture is increasingly becoming the culture of, just give full vent.
Chris Rock,
Do the first,
Will
do what
Smith.
you want. What's that?
I said Will Smith slapping Chris Rock, right? Like, I'm
Yeah,
mad at the moment. I'm gonna take care of it right now.
just follow your impulse seems to be the mantra of today. To do the first thing you think about or do what feels good to you in the moment. And we become so myopically focused in the moment that we lose sight of the big picture. And when I was thinking through this week, in preparation for this, it took me back to a talk that Andy Stanley gave years ago at a LeaderCast event that I was at. And it was on this whole principle of self-leadership. And he provided a series of principles about self-leadership, which I really think this is all about, right? This is,
Mhm.
when you think about the second component of emotional intelligence, it's that self-management. It's my ability. This is really what maturity is about, right? Regardless of my personality, it's my willingness, my ability to manage, to control, to those impulses, those drives, those emotions inside of me in a way that's healthy and productive. And you think
Absolutely.
about the most successful people in the world, they're typically the most composed. you know, they don't give into big highs, they don't give into, the low lows. They make decisions like
They're
right
steady.
there in the middle. And one of the things that he said a few things in his talk that I thought were amazing. I brought them up. He said, you won't be a leader worth following unless you lead yourself well.
Hmm.
And then he said, exceptional self leadership is the key to sustained influence. Exceptional self leadership is the key to sustained performance. And then he said this, and I think it really relates to what we're talking about today. What you want now is rarely what you value most. And I mean,
Wow.
wow. I mean, isn't that exactly what we're talking about now? Then that's the challenge. What I want now is rarely what I value most. And I think to myself, almost 100% of the time, when I just go with how I'm feeling in the moment, I regret it almost 100% of the time and step back and say, that's not who I want to be. That's not how I wanted to respond. That's not in alignment with how I want to be remembered as a human. That's not in harmony with the legacy that I want to leave, the person that I want to be. And that really, that's the crux of leadership, is me first, leading myself well.
Wow, that's well said. Any final thoughts as we wrap this up today on why, last 2 cents on why it's important to exercise restraint? Like why does it even matter? What do you think?
Well, I'll go back to Jackie Robinson, because it's bigger than you. Your life needs to be bigger than yourself. It needs to be about others. We need to have a purpose, a vision for our life that is a compass that governs and influences who we are in the moment, because our actions, our words matter, and they influence and impact every life that we touch. And every time that we make a choice to not live in harmony with those values that align with that greater purpose and vision for our life, we lose something. We lose something in the process. So again, this book just keeps bringing us back to this question: what's my why? What is my purpose for being on this planet that is truly transcendent, that enriches, adds value to, blesses, serves people, those that I touch each and every day?
That's well said. And if relationships are paramount to life, our restraint allows room for relationships. Because the flip of that is a lot of times we're reacting on something someone has done to us, right? But we never know where they're at. Maybe they just had the most awful day, or maybe they've just come from a really difficult situation and circumstance. And when you don't show restraint and allow grace, like, that relationship's broken, sometimes irreparably, right?
Exactly.
And so, what is it? I think Obama said, when they go low, we go high. So maybe that's our challenge, wherever we're at this week, whatever happens, to go high, to exercise restraint, to put our ego in the back seat, and to keep that vision of who we want to be and our why ever before us, so we can always strive to reach that with nothing hindering us on the way.
Great word, buddy.
All right. Well, as we close today, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. We're walking through the book, Ego is the Enemy, chapter by chapter. This is chapter 6, Restrain Yourself. Make sure you tune in next week, and we'll go through chapter 7. And if you're not watching this live, I wanted to let you know we'll make a video recording of this available on our YouTube and Facebook channel. So make sure you like, subscribe, and engage with us wherever you find us, and tag someone in it. Maybe we'll give you a shout out for doing that as well. We hope you found this discussion helpful. And until next time, this is Paul Mosco and Bill Cox saying so long for the Level Up Your Legacy live stream and podcast.
Hey, thanks again for watching today's video. And before you go to the bottom of the screen, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and make sure you go to billcoxcoaching.com. Sign up for our regular newsletter to help you move from success to significance and lead your life in such a way that you live a legacy. Have a great day.